Whenever you're having discomfort, you always want to treat the root cause first and then address any remaining issues. That way you're not making unnecessary compromises and sacrificing things you don't need to sacrifice. The general rule is to focus on ergonomics first before adding padding or softness. Ergonomic means that it interfaces correctly with your body. Softness is just the window dressing on top. Pressure points are areas of concentrated pressure, and they're probably the most common source of pain or discomfort. The potential for harm depends on the amount of force applied, the time it's applied, and the surface area and shape of the object applying force. Pressure points can cause pain, bruising, skin damage, and even pressure ulcers over time. For concealed carry inside the waistband, one of the most common pressure points people encounter is the muzzle of the gun digging into their pelvis and creating a painful hot spot. This is especially likely if you're carrying with a smaller gun with less mass below the belt. See the Keel Principle video. Another source is putting a flat gun on a sharply curved body part where the gun only has a small amount of surface area to contact. You can also get pressure points from areas on the holster that end abruptly or that don't interface well with your body. So for example, the gun touching your thigh when you're seated isn't normally a big deal if the muzzle is rounded. But if the weight of the gun is resting on a narrow band of material, that smaller surface can create a pressure point that becomes painful over time. Choosing something with a rounded muzzle can help, but you can also just move the gun higher, as we discussed in the carry position section. The neat thing about pressure points is that eliminating them usually means making the gun lay flat against the body, which not only makes it more comfortable, it also happens to give us better concealment. So you can kill two birds with one stone by getting the gun into your sweet spot and adjusting it to lie flat. If you watched our basic Concealment Mechanics series, you already know how to do that. If not, well, quick heads up. One of the most common pressure point mistakes I see is when people use stiff belts for inside the waistband carry. If your belt is too stiff, it will bridge instead of conforming to your body. Check out our video about that. Another thing to consider is that your body moves. So you may not have a problem when you're standing, but you may run into issues when the holster encounters your body when you bend or when you sit for long periods of time. If that's the case, go back to the concealment boundaries step and see if you can find a better spot on your body that's further away from your joints. The last thing you can do is add pads to bridge or soften the pressure points. That works, but you may lose some concealment since the pad tends to act like a snowshoe and resist the concealment mechanics. General best practice is to resolve any concealment mechanics or sweet spot issues first and then add the minimum amount of padding necessary, just enough to get the job done. Here's a quick tip. Adhesive Velcro loop actually works really well for this because it gives you an ultra thin but cushy layer of padding. Friction is the next most common source of concealed carry comfort problems. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to define friction as excessive movement of the gun relative to the surface of the skin, so the gun is rubbing or sliding. To solve friction issues at the root, first try to minimize the movement of the gun. You can do that by repositioning the gun in a lower movement area of the body. If you're carrying low and your gun gets nudged up every time you move your leg, try carrying a little higher so there's less interference. You can also secure the gun better with a more stable belt or holster system. If you can't get the gun to be perfectly still, then the next step is to add an undergarment or a liner to protect your skin. That can be as simple as an undershirt or high-waisted underwear, or it could be a liner applied to the holster itself, such as moleskin. Skin shear is the movement of the top layers of the skin relative to the bottom layers of the skin. So imagine going down a metal slide in shorts. As the skin is pulled, it strains and damages the underlying layers and the connections in between. Skin shear can be caused by just the holster itself, where it encounters your skin and sticks, but it's especially likely if you're using a holster with silicone or sticky material. If you do a lot of running, be especially watchful of this because repetitive bouncing can add up to a skin shear injury over time. Like friction, the first key to solving skin shear is to minimize the movement of the gun. So get it on a lower movement area of your body if you can, keep it away from your joints, and make sure it's as secure and stable as possible. You might want to experiment with stretchy versus non-stretchy belts and carry systems to see which works best for your body, because that can actually vary depending on how much soft tissue jiggle you get when moving. You can also add a low friction undergarment or liner, such as compression shorts or a rash guard. Another thing that can work if you're having problems with skin shear is using a lubricant like Body Glide that helps the gun slide over the skin rather than sticking to it. The last thing that can help is reducing the weight of the gun, which helps to reduce the amount of force that's transferred by bouncing and other movements. Placing a solid object against the body prevents heat loss and moisture evaporation. When your skin is chronically damp and hot, it actually weakens, which makes all of the above injuries more likely to happen and more severe if they do happen. It can also contribute to infection and irritation. Skin microclimate refers to the conditions at your skin's surface. While we can't completely eliminate the inherent issues involved in carrying a gun against your body all day, there are a few things we can do to manage those conditions as best we can. Hygiene and moisture management are really important. Use washable holster and wedge materials and make sure to clean them regularly. If you're using pads or wedges, grab a couple of extras so you can switch them out periodically when they get wet. You can also use breathable or wicking liners and undergarments. Materials with natural or synthetic antimicrobial properties can also help, something like sheepskin or antimicrobial fabrics. If you're having problems with your skin health, you might want to consider minimizing the amount of time you spend carrying when it's feasible to do that. So this is going to depend on your lifestyle and your risk assessment, and it requires weighing the pros and cons of each choice. So for example, you might decide to use a pocket holster around the house instead of carrying inside your waistband. The last thing we're going to cover is imbalance. That's when you have too much weight or leverage in one area of the body. Imagine carrying a heavy gun on your ankle and running a marathon. That's imbalance. Imbalance can cause pain immediately or over time. It can cause posture or gait changes, and it can actually make you lose mobility or worsen any chronic issues you might be having. One way to solve imbalance is to move the gun closer to the center of the body, if possible. You can also reduce the weight of the gun and minimize the amount of time you spent carrying it. It's a good idea to ask a professional about exercise or physical therapy, especially if you think imbalance may cause problems for you down the line. Prevention is going to be the best solution, and you can stop these issues before they even occur. Contrary to popular belief, carrying a gun is not supposed to be painful, and you are supposed